HQ will reroute immediately. That's what the airport operations manager ordered, blocking the royal guard as he escorted his fallen brother-in-arms through the terminal. But he crossed the line the moment he dared to touch the flag-draped casket. Want to know what happened next? First, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below telling us where in the world you're watching from. Now, without further ado, let's get into it. The polished black shoes of Sergeant Edward Winslow moved with mechanical precision across the gleaming floor of Heathrow's Terminal 5. His scarlet uniform stood in stark contrast to the sea of casual travelers, the bearskin cap adding nearly a foot to his already impressive height. His white-gloved hands gripped the corner of the flag-draped casket with unwavering steadiness, his face a mask of disciplined composure. The afternoon rush swirled around the slow-moving honor guard procession. Travelers halted mid-stride, conversations died, and children's questions were hushed by parents who recognized the gravity of what was passing before them. "Excuse me," came a clipped voice from Winslow's left, "but you really need to pick up the pace here." Richard Barnes, Terminal Operations Manager, approached with a hurried step. His navy suit was impeccably tailored, but his tie hung slightly askew. His fingers tapped impatiently against the tablet he carried, his bearing communicating the offense of having his carefully orchestrated airport flow disrupted. "Sir, we're on a time schedule here," Barnes continued when Winslow didn't immediately acknowledge him. "We've got 3 international flights deplaning, and this main concourse needs to remain clear. You'll need to expedite this procession." Sergeant Winslow's eyes remained fixed forward, his pace unchanged. "Sir," he responded, his voice quiet but authoritative. "This is Lieutenant Matthew Henshaw of the Royal Marines. We will proceed at the appropriate pace for escorting the fallen." Barnes glanced at the Union Jack draped over the casket. "Yes, and I respect that, but surely you understand the needs of an airport. We can arrange a more efficient route through our service corridors." Private Cooper maintained his forward gaze, though a muscle in his jaw twitched imperceptibly. "That won't be possible, sir," Winslow replied. "Lieutenant Henshaw will be escorted with full honors through the main terminal as arranged and approved by airport administration." A family stood near the windows. An elderly man with military bearings stood straight despite his years, medals visible on his jacket. Beside him, a woman in her 30s placed an arm around a young girl, their eyes fixed on the flag-draped casket with a mixture of pride and grief that only military families understand. "I don't care what was arranged." Barnes's voice rose. "I'm telling you now that this is disrupting operations." "Mr. Barnes," came a female voice as Airport Security Officer Isabel Chambers approached. "Perhaps I could speak with you for a moment." Her eyes flicked to the casket, then to the waiting family. Barnes brushed off her intervention. "In a minute, Chambers. I'm handling a situation here." He turned back to Winslow. "Officer, I'm trying to be reasonable, but if you continue to disrupt operations—" "Lieutenant Henshaw gave his life in service to the Crown," Winslow interrupted. "He will be escorted with the dignity his sacrifice deserves." The procession continued, leaving Barnes standing with his unfinished threat. As they passed, travelers stepped back, many bowing their heads. The family watched their approach, the little girl clutching her mother's hand as she watched the ceremonial uniform that represented her uncle's final journey home. Sergeant Winslow had known Lieutenant Matthew Henshaw for 7 years. They'd trained together, served 2 tours in Afghanistan side by side, and shared the bond that only forms when men trust each other with their lives. 3 nights ago, Winslow received the call that Henshaw hadn't made it back from a classified operation. His last words to his friend echoed in his memory. "If anything happens, Ed, bring me home proper." Those words weighed heavier than the corner of the casket he now carried. Each step was a fulfillment of that promise, not just to escort a fallen soldier, but to bring home a brother. Behind them, Barnes muttered into his radio, his face flushed. I need additional staff at Main Concourse East. We have a military transport refusing to comply. The Henshaw family waited with the stillness of those accustomed to military ceremony. Thomas Henshaw, the veteran father, stood with parade ground straightness despite his 73 years. The medals on his jacket caught the light as he breathed deeply, preparing for the moment the casket would reach him. Daddy served with Uncle Matthew, didn't he? Young Emma whispered. Yes, sweetheart, Rebecca answered softly. Sergeant Winslow was your uncle's closest friend. He looks so serious, Emma observed. That's because what he's doing is very important, Thomas explained. He's bringing your uncle home with honor. Barnes moved ahead to intercept them further down the concourse, sending messages for reinforcements. Meanwhile, travelers formed an impromptu audience. Phones were lowered, conversations hushed, and hurried paces slowed as people sensed they were witnessing something significant. Winslow remained aware of his surroundings as they approached the junction where Barnes stood with additional staff. The operations manager held out a laminated manual like a shield. Behind him, a service corridor door stood open. Sergeant Barnes called out, "Per Heathrow, Security Protocol 15B. Funeral processions must utilize service corridors. I've arranged an alternate route." Winslow continued his measured pace. Private Cooper maintained perfect formation beside him. "Did you hear me, Sergeant?" Barnes's voice rose. "I am redirecting your procession." Winslow finally spoke. Section 15B applies to civilian funeral processions. Military escorts are covered under Section 2 to a established following conflicts in Iraq and Afghanistan. Barnes blinked. "I don't. Section 2 to a states that military honor guards escorting fallen service personnel shall be afforded direct routes through main terminals," Winslow continued. This was confirmed with Director Cranford. Barnes's face flushed. "That may be, but as operations manager, I'm making a real-time assessment. This is non-negotiable." He gestured to his staff to form a barrier. "The service corridor will take you to the same exit." Thomas Henshaw stepped forward. "That's my son," he said, his voice carrying the weight of paternal grief. "He died ensuring others could come home. Surely you can grant him the dignity of the proper path." Barnes hesitated before his professional persona reasserted itself. "Sir, I sympathize with your loss, but this is an airport, not a military base. We have protocols. Uncle Matthew was a hero, wasn't he, Grandpa?" Emma's voice pierced the tension as she moved beside her grandfather. "Mom says heroes deserve special honor." "Young lady," Barnes began, softening slightly, "I'm sure your uncle was brave." But Lieutenant Henshaw, Winslow interrupted, led a rescue operation that saved 27 civilians and 14 servicemen. He was awarded the Military Cross posthumously. His escort will proceed as arranged. The honor guard continued, the rhythm of their steps countering Barnes's demands. "This is my airport," Barnes hissed, stepping directly into their path, "and my rules apply to everyone. You will redirect, or I'll call security." Isabel Chambers stepped forward. "Mr. Barnes, I strongly advise against that. Security protocols support the sergeant's position." "For Mr. Barnes," he said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a man who had led others in combat. "My son died upholding values that include respect and dignity. Perhaps you might consider honoring those values now." Barnes turned, his patience visibly at its end. "With all due respect, sir, this isn't about values. It's about airport operations, security protocols, and the thousands of people being delayed by this unnecessary display." Behind him, the crowd of observers had grown larger. Many had stopped entirely, feeling themselves witnesses to something important. Parents were explaining in hushed tones to their children why the men in uniform were carrying a flag-covered box, and why everyone was arguing about which way they should go. As the confrontation reached its tipping point, Barnes made his final stand. He physically moved to block the casket's path, one hand coming dangerously close to the flag-draped surface as he gestured emphatically toward the service corridor. "This ends now," he declared, his voice carrying the frustration of a man whose authority was being challenged publicly. "You will redirect as instructed, or I will be forced to take more decisive action." The moment hung suspended in the bustling terminal. Barnes, standing with his hand hovering mere inches from the flag draped over Lieutenant Henshaw's casket, Sergeant Winslow and Private Cooper maintaining their ceremonial bearing despite the obstruction, and hundreds of travelers watching the tableau unfold. "Last chance, Sergeant," Barnes said, his voice tight with authority under pressure. "Redirect now, or I'll be forced to." His fingers made contact with the flag's edge, intending to emphasize his point by touching the casket. What happened next occurred with such swift precision that many observers would later describe it as almost balletic in its controlled execution. Winslow's white-gloved hand shot out and grasped Barnes's wrist. The movement broke his ceremonial stance, but retained all of its disciplined control, not violent, not aggressive, but utterly immovable. His grip was like steel wrapped in velvet, professional yet uncompromising. The terminal fell completely silent. Even the overhead announcements seemed to pause, as if the airport itself held its breath. "You will not touch that flag, sir." Winslow's voice remained level. But there was something in it now that made several onlookers step back instinctively, the unmistakable voice of a man who had faced combat and would not be moved by bureaucratic intimidation. Barnes's eyes widened, cycling through shock, outrage, and the dawning realization that he had miscalculated. He tried to pull away, but Winslow's grip remained firm. "This is assault," Barnes sputtered. "You can't—" "This," Winslow replied, nodding toward the casket, "is Lieutenant Matthew Henshaw. He died shielding his team from an explosion during an extraction operation. The flag you touched is the same flag he served under, the flag that now honors his sacrifice." His eyes held Barnes's with unwavering intensity. "And yes, sir, I can prevent you from dishonoring it." A murmur ran through the crowd. People stood at respectful attention, sensing they were witnessing something significant. "Do you know what Lieutenant Henshaw was doing when he died, Mr. Barnes?" Winslow continued, his voice carrying just enough to reach the gathered observers without shouting. "He was ensuring that civilians caught in a conflict zone could board an evacuation transport. He was maintaining order in chaos, creating a path for those who couldn't create one for themselves." The parallel to their current situation hung unspoken in the air. Barnes swallowed hard, glancing around at the many witnesses. "I'm simply doing my job," he managed, though his voice had lost much of its previous authority. "As was he," Winslow replied evenly. "The difference is that he gave his life doing it." From the edge of the gathering, Thomas Henshaw stepped forward again, his military bearing a testament to his own service. "My son understood protocol. Mr. Barnes, he followed rules and orders his entire career. But he also understood when those rules needed to yield to something more important." Winslow released Barnes's wrist with the same controlled precision with which he'd grasped it. Returning immediately to his ceremonial position, the message had been delivered without a word being explicitly spoken. Some lines could not be crossed. Barnes rubbed his wrist, though Winslow's grip had been firm rather than painful. The public nature of his rebuke had left him visibly shaken, his previously absolute certainty crumbling under the weight of accumulated witnesses and the silent judgment in their eyes. "Your job, as I understand it," Winslow continued, his voice modulated to carry without aggression, "is to ensure this airport functions properly. Our job is to ensure Lieutenant Henshaw returns home with the dignity his sacrifice deserves. I believe both objectives can be accomplished if you simply allow us to proceed as arranged and approved." A new voice entered the conversation, Firm, authoritative, and carrying institutional weight. That's precisely what will happen. Airport Director Martin Cranford strode through the parting crowd, his expression one of professional concern mixed with personal disapproval. Behind him, Isabel Chambers stood with quiet vindication. Director Cranford, Barnes began, scrambling to regain his footing. I was just explaining to these military personnel that our protocols require. I'm well aware of our protocols, Mr. Barnes, Cranford interrupted, his tone making it clear this wasn't their first clash over interpretations of rules, including Section 2(a), which I personally signed off on 3 years ago after consulting with military liaison officers. He turned to Winslow, his demeanor shifting to one of respect. Sergeant, please accept my apologies for this interruption to your solemn duty. Your escort will proceed as arranged. He glanced at the watching crowd, then back to the honor guard. In fact, I believe we can do better than simply allowing you to pass. Cranford turned to address the terminal at large. Ladies and gentlemen, a fallen serviceman is being escorted home today. Those who wish to show their respect may line the route. Those who need to continue to their flights, please use the Eastern Concourse. The response was immediate and humbling. Travelers who had been rushing moments before now lined up along the path, creating a corridor of respect. Business travelers stood shoulder to shoulder with families. Airport staff stepped out from behind counters. Even the busy coffee shop emptied as baristas moved to stand at attention. Barnes stood to the side, his earlier obstruction now impossible to maintain in the face of his superior's direct intervention and the public's clear sentiment. His expression had transformed from righteous enforcement to uncomfortable self-awareness. Young Emma Henshaw watched with wide eyes as the corridor of respect formed. "Look, Mommy," she whispered. "Everyone's standing up for Uncle Matthew." Rebecca nodded, tears streaming silently down her face. "That's what happens when a hero comes home, sweetheart." Thomas Henshaw stood ramrod straight, his weathered hand moving up in a perfect military salute as the honor guard resumed their solemn march with his son's casket. The old soldier's eyes met Winslow's for a brief moment, a look of profound gratitude passing between them as one military man to another. Winslow nodded almost imperceptibly in acknowledgment before returning his gaze forward, his bearing once again the perfect picture of ceremonial precision. The honor guard proceeded through the corridor of respect, their measured steps echoing in the now reverent silence of the busy terminal. The procession moved with renewed dignity through the corridor of respect that had spontaneously formed. Sergeant Winslow and Private Cooper maintained their perfect ceremonial bearing. But something had changed in the atmosphere, a shared understanding that had spread through the terminal like a wave. Director Cranford approached Barnes, speaking in a low voice that nonetheless carried to those nearby. "We'll discuss this incident in my office later. For now, I suggest you observe what real protocol looks like." The reprimand was professional but left no doubt about his displeasure. Barnes nodded stiffly, his earlier certainty replaced by the uncomfortable awareness of having grossly misjudged the situation. He watched as the honor guard approached the Henshaw family, his perspective visibly shifting as he observed the human impact of what he had attempted to reroute through a service corridor. Thomas Henshaw stood at perfect attention, his aging body summoning the discipline of his military years as his son's casket approached. Beside him, Rebecca gently guided Emma to stand straight, the little girl's face solemn with instinctive understanding beyond her years. As the honor guard drew level with the family, Winslow broke protocol in the smallest, most significant way. His eyes shifted briefly to meet Thomas Henshaw's gaze. No words were exchanged, but volumes were communicated in that moment between the old soldier and the young one, a promise fulfilled, a duty honored, a shared understanding of sacrifice that civilians could respect but never fully comprehend. Emma, watching carefully, raised her small hand in an unpracticed but heartfelt salute as her uncle's casket passed. The gesture, innocent yet profound, brought fresh tears to the eyes of many observers. One business traveler who had been complaining loudly about delays just 20 minutes earlier now stood in reverent silence, his earlier frustrations forgotten in the face of genuine sacrifice. Isabel Chambers had moved through the crowd, quietly explaining to those who asked what they were witnessing. "The guard in the ceremonial uniform is from the same regiment as the fallen," she told the curious family. "It's their way of bringing him home with honor." The honor guard continued their measured progress toward the exit where a hearse waited. The crowd maintained its respectful silence, many bowing their heads as the casket passed. Airport staff who had been assisting Barnes earlier now stood at attention, their allegiance shifted by witnessing true authority, not the kind that comes from a clipboard and regulations, but the kind earned through service and sacrifice. Director Cranford walked several paces behind the procession, his presence ensuring that no further obstacles would impede their path. His eyes occasionally moved to Barnes, who remained rooted in place, watching the scene unfold with growing comprehension of his error. As they approached the terminal exit, the honor guard's discipline remained unwavering. Outside, the afternoon sun illuminated the waiting hearse, its driver standing at respectful attention beside the open rear door. Beyond, a police escort waited to accompany Lieutenant Henshaw on the next stage of his journey home. The loading of the casket into the hearse was executed with flawless precision, each movement deliberate and dignified. Winslow and Cooper stepped back in perfect unison, rendering a final salute as the hearse door was closed. Inside the terminal, the gathered crowd began to disperse, returning to their travels with something valuable added to their journey, a glimpse of traditions that still mattered, of principles worth upholding, of respect that transcended everyday conveniences. Barnes stood reflective, his earlier certainty gone. Cranford approached him again. "Sometimes, Richard, efficiency isn't the most important value." "I was just trying to maintain operations," Barnes replied, his defensiveness hollow. "And they maintained something far more significant," Cranford answered, nodding toward the departing honor guard. As Winslow prepared to leave, Thomas Henshaw approached, extending his hand. The old soldier's grip was still firm despite his years. "Thank you for bringing my boy home with honor." "It was my privilege, sir. He was one of our finest." Emma moved forward. "Did you know my uncle well?" she asked, looking up at Winslow. Winslow knelt to her level. "I did. He spoke of you often, said you had his same smile." The little girl nodded. "Mommy says I need to remember him properly. Is that what you were doing?" "That's exactly right," Winslow replied gently. "Some things are worth doing properly, no matter what stands in the way." What we witnessed today was more than just a confrontation between airport protocol and military tradition. It was a reminder that standing firm for what's right, for the traditions and respects that honor sacrifice, can teach powerful lessons to everyone involved. Sometimes the most important choices we make aren't about efficiency or convenience, but about preserving the dignity that makes us truly human. When was the last time you saw someone stand up for what was right, even when it would have been easier to back down? And what traditions do you think deserve more respect in today's fast-paced world, and why? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective on this powerful moment. If this story touched you, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories that highlight courage, respect, and honor. Don't forget to press the bell icon so you never miss our daily uploads. Consider sharing this video with someone who appreciates stories about those who stand firm for what matters, even when faced with obstacles. Our previous videos are appearing on your screen right now. Why not check them out next? We'll see you tomorrow at the same time with another brand new story.